Well, good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, and a very warm welcome to Bangkok and InfoComm Southeast Asia. It's good to see a lot of familiar faces in the audience. For those of you whom I've not had the privilege to meet, my name is Richard Tan. I'm the Executive Director of InfoCommAsia Pte Ltd, the organizer of this event here in Bangkok, InfoComm Southeast Asia. InfoCommAsia organizes 3 events for the AV industry in Asia. One in Beijing, China, one in Mumbai in India, and this one here in Bangkok. For those of you who are attending this event for the first time, I should let you know that it was first held in 2019, and it brought together some 8,000 business visitors from all across Asia. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic, we had to put the brakes on the show's ability to deliver in-person events for the last 2 years. So I'm very, very glad that we're able to finally get back on track again with this event. Our shows in China and India are organized for their respective domestic markets and together bring more than 50,000 attendees. This event here in Bangkok, as the name implies, is promoted to end users and AV channel professionals from across all the countries in Southeast Asia: Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam, Philippines, Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, and of course, Thailand. From next year, however, we plan for the show to bring together AV professionals not just from Southeast Asia, but from across all the Asia-Pacific countries, all the way from Japan and China in the north to India and Australia in the south. InfoComm Asia, as this show will be renamed from 2023, will play an increasingly important role in providing a platform for all manufacturers from all around the world who are interested in developing a strong presence in the Asia-Pacific market to congregate at one place where their companies can be introduced or their latest solutions revealed, and where they can invite their customers from all over the region to experience them and to enjoy the inexpensive hospitality of Bangkok, voted for multiple years the most visited city in the world, and for good reason. In a world where geopolitical tensions are dividing markets and people, InfoComm Asia, the event, will be a safe haven and unifying platform for one and all to participate as exhibitors and to attend as visitors. And we look forward to seeing all of you here each year. This afternoon's AV Leaders Connect program is designed to bring AV professionals from the region to meet, to learn from each other, and very importantly, to make friends. The program has 2 parts. The first 2 hours is dedicated to 2 presentations and a panel discussion. And that will follow with a networking reception that will be held just a few rooms away on this same floor. We will begin with our keynote presentation that is entitled Leadership in an Uncertain Future. The world is contending with a number of challenges: economic uncertainty and rising inflation, the war in Ukraine, food insecurity, an energy crisis, and a lingering pandemic. Many have called this the perfect storm. How can businesses emerge stronger in crisis and withstand future shocks? To help us with this question, we've invited Dr. Andrew Staples, who's the Regional APAC Head of Policy and Insights at The Economist's Impact. Andrew is a seasoned speaker, presenting as part of his work at Economist Group, as well as for client forums and briefings. He provides clients such as ABN AMRO, Bayer, DHL, JP Morgan, and Mercedes-Benz with insight and analysis on a range of issues relating to doing business in the APAC region. Andrew has also made numerous appearances in international media, including BBC Asia Business Report, BBC World News, CNN, CNBC, and Channel News Asia. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Andrew Staples to deliver our keynote address.
It is on. Okay, fantastic. Richard, thank you very much for the kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be with you today. Andy Staples, I'm based in Singapore, been in the region on and off since the mid-1990s. And it's always a pleasure to join this type of meeting so I can interact with you, the specialists in your field. I don't have anything to tell you about your areas of specialism, but hopefully I can bring some sort of insight and our analysis from the Economist Group about what's going on in the world and specifically here within the region. So bear with me, I've got a few slides to go through. Hopefully they're visual. There will be plenty of sort of data points coming out, and I think we can share the deck with you later, and certainly happy to take any questions towards the end of the presentation. If I can't answer them directly, I'll be able to get somebody in our team to get back to you with specific responses. Okay, let me kick off then. So this is our agenda really, and I thought just mapping out some base points for to be thinking about. What is the outlook for the global and Asian economy? What are some of the key trends, opportunities and risks that we're all facing? And what does this mean for business and for business leaders like yourself as well? Just to give it a bit of context, I run the policy research and insights team for Economist Impact. And if you haven't heard of Economist Impact, it was launched as a new brand about a year ago. Formerly, we were in the Economist Intelligence Unit, so that's the part of the business that I run. We do a lot of evidence-based research that goes into B2B engagement, consulting with companies, with organizations, multilaterals, governments, and so on. What I'm drawing on today will be a mixture of content from the Economist Intelligence Unit itself, from The Economist, the magazine, and from some of the research that we do as Economist Impact and the interaction that we have with business leaders across all different sectors here within Asia in particular. Okay, so I'm going to give you a little bit of context to this discussion. I think Richard was talking about some of the challenges that the global economy faces at the moment, and this is our real area of specialism. This is what we keep our eye on, this is what we think about, this is what we analyze, and that then goes into all of the content that we deliver as well. But I'm just going to take you back a few years. One of the great pleasures of working for the Economist Group is you get to use these covers all the time. And if you are a subscriber, there's a really nice weekly sort of bit of video where they show how the cover was put together that week and the thinking that went behind it as well. But I think, you know, if a picture tells 1,000 stories, then we've got a few here. Just, you know, pointing out a few covers from over the world. You know, all of the challenges that we face today are not necessarily anything new. They've been brewing, they've been developing for quite some years, and really it's difficult to go back in time and say when things started to get a little bit worrying. Maybe you want to go back to the Asian financial crisis here, 97, 98, or you might want to think about China joining the WTO in 2001, which is a monumental issue that's really still playing out today. You could, though, go back to the global financial crisis, 2007, 2008, and the backlash against globalization, I guess. You see that coming through in populism. We saw that informing, for example, the Brexit debate in the UK, or the election of President Trump in the United States. But anyway, there's this sort of growing unease about the trajectory of globalization. Remember that sort of period, particularly going from the sort of 80s through the 90s into the early 2000s of sort of hyper-globalization, all those barriers to trade coming down, massive amounts of investment going around the world and so on. And everybody, you know, benefiting from that, or not. Because if you were in some of the places that were felt that they'd been left behind, then you were not voting for globalization, you were voting for protectionism, you were voting for populist responses to that and so on. So, you know, this is something that we keep our eye on. This is something there called the world disorder, that sort of questioning of all of those assumptions that we've had guiding the global economy for many decades. Also to pick out the sort of the politicization of business, and particularly I think thinking in your sectors, think about tech, thinking about semiconductors, thinking about China, the United States, and all of the issues and tensions that we have there that are having real ramifications today in terms of supply chains, for example, who you can do business with and the currencies that you can use and so on. And then of course, you know, within all of that context, then COVID comes along and is a real sort of body blow to the global economy. These are just 3 covers over about 4 or 5 weeks or so, where we started to hear about COVID in China, and now it's gone global, and then eventually we find that the global economy is switched off. And this is, you know, unprecedented to see that economic activity literally switched off in many countries around the world, and the responses from governments to that, furlough schemes, massive increase in government debt to try to keep economies afloat and so on, and we're paying for that now. I'll come on to that in a moment. Once we started to get on top of COVID, we had the vaccines coming out, and then we had sort of gradual reopening, particularly in places like Europe, United States, and the UK, to a lesser extent here in Asia. I think we're still living with this. COVID is certainly a key issue in China. We had the COVID zero policy there, and so on. I was in Japan just last week. They're only just starting to open up to tourists and so on. And in that context, that massive surge of demand, that bounce back that we saw, leading to these real dislocations in supply chains, which everybody is familiar with. And some of that is coming off now. The cost of shipping around the world is starting to come down again and will continue into 2023. But supply chains are really out of kilter, and this has created a lot of inflationary pressures within the world today, which I'll come back to a little bit later. And just as we're getting on top of that, then we get Mr. Putin's invasion of Ukraine, which has caused all sorts of issues for the global economy, from food prices, energy prices, geopolitical tension, and so on and so on. So these are all sort of body blows that have been hitting the global economy. Not least this energy crisis, which is playing out here in Asia as well, but most particularly in places like Europe, where the cost of energy is going through the roof, spiraling inflation, cost of living crises, and so on, which is important to keep in mind, because if you're thinking about where demand is in the global economy, and particularly here in Asia, an export-orientated regional economy, where that demand starts to drop off in Europe, in the United States, then that has ramifications for us here as well. So there you go, how high can interest rates go? And this is a new era that we're in. If you do cast your mind back to 2007, 2008, where the global economy crashed, the response of central banks was to cut interest rates all around the world. Virtually zero interest rates. In fact, Japan still has negative interest rates on some of its bonds. But money for a whole sort of decade or more, and I'll show you a graph in a moment, was very, very cheap. All of that has come to a grinding halt now, as interest rates have been shooting up around the world in an attempt to keep inflation down. The other sort of major thing for us here is thinking about the Chinese economy. We've just had a major meeting in China, which has reaffirmed Xi Jinping as the leader of that country for another 5 years, or perhaps life. We don't know. But anyway, the Chinese economy, which has been a real engine of growth for the past, 3 decades at least, is maturing, it's slowing. We think that this year it'd be lucky to grow at 3.3%, which is unprecedented. And a big reason for all of that is this continuing zero COVID policy, which is just strangling off economic activity. So we have to contend with that major issue as well. And all of this really leading to some questions around, the next stage for globalization, and where do we go from here? We have competing models of globalization. China's view of the global economy and the rules-based international order is very, very different from that perceived in, say, Washington or London or Frankfurt and so on. So, all of these tensions and competitions are there. Okay, so that's just a little bit of background about some of the major sort of themes that we think are shaping the global economy. And I'll come on now to have a look at our economic outlook. So these first 3 slides really sort of thinking about the global economy. And if you look over here, these are the sort of 3 key issues that we think are really important here and now and going into 2023. And just to sort of take a look at this chart here and talk you through it. So various countries here. This is our forecast for economic growth in the blue, and where you see this brown, orange one, that's our revised forecast in the wake of this war in Ukraine. And pretty much across the board, you see a downgrade in economic, in our growth forecast for these economies. Few places like Saudi Arabia have benefited massively because of oil, demand for oil, and oil exports from Russia being shut off to the European Union and the States, for example. Places like Brazil and Argentina, big exporters of food, are benefiting from this as well, if you think about those grain exports from Ukraine. So, there are winners and losers in all of this, but generally, and if you take it at the macro level, we think that this war is taking about $1 trillion out of global GDP. And it's a major reason why growth is slowing this year and will continue to slow next year as well. A second issue that I've been talking about or sort of referenced is the cost of money. So we're thinking here about inflation and we're thinking here about interest rates. And that's what I was talking about here. If you go back even further, 2007, there's the UK, there's the United States, Eurozone, and look at this sort of interest rates that we had during that whole period. And it was only really the United States that was able to start sort of normalizing interest rates, getting them up to about 2%, which is what a big developed economy would target, 2% inflation, 2% interest rate for the central bank. But places like the European Union, bumping along the zero bound, in an attempt to get money into the economy and to get economic activity taking place. And then this is COVID here. So, the response of governments, again, to pump money into the economy because things have been shut down, where workers are losing their jobs or been furloughed or so on. So they've had to cut the cost of money. And then you get this massive shock here, which is what we're living through now. Because of all of that supply chain disruption, because of the war in Ukraine, because of China's zero COVID policy, and because of that sort of pent-up demand that's coming out around the world, you've seen a huge spike in inflationary pressures, particularly in the developed world. This year, we'll probably see at a global level inflation of about 10%, which is its highest level for 26 years. In the UK, we're seeing inflation that we haven't seen, rates of inflation that we haven't seen since the 1970s. So, this is a major, major shock to the global economy, which will impact on growth and so on. And then you can see again this sort of rise in debt, and this is the UK trying to its period of austerity after the global financial crisis, same in Europe, and then this massive increase in spending to try to get the economies going. We're paying for that now. Okay. And then finally, thinking about this economic slowdown in China. China's economy is huge. It's forecast to overtake the United States at some point in the next few years in terms of brute size. But it's also maturing. It's changing. The investment that was driving that type of growth 20 years ago, low-cost labor and so on, all of that's gone. China wage differential is not very big at all. In fact, people are there more for the market rather than for making something in China and exporting it out. We saw massive investment in infrastructure over the past few decades in China. Overinvestment. And if you look at the property market in China at the moment, you've seen these dramatic videos of whole housing estates, tower blocks being blown up because they're bankrupt, they're not needed and so on. This is a massive overhang for the Chinese economy that they're going to have to work through. And on top of that, they're switching off economic activity in an attempt to maintain this zero COVID policy. So this is one of the reasons why China's economy is slowing, but it's also a natural consequence of the maturing of that economy as well. Take all those three things together, economic growth, the economic outlook is not particularly encouraging. Let me come on to a bit more detail on that now. So, got some very geeky friends who work at The Economist, and they like playing around with data and data maps and all the rest of it. And this is like a heat chart for the global economy. There's the UK, there's Canada, United States, Philippines, for example. And over here you can see the heat map, where you see economies growing at the same rate as the global economy, or there or thereabouts, they'll be in this type of green color. Where they're growing at a much faster rate, so you take places like Vietnam or the Philippines this year, Philippines probably going to grow about 7% this year, massive domestic demand and so on, then you see a hotter color, a red there. And then of course, if you come over here, Russia and Ukraine, those economies are in free fall, given that they're engaged in a war at the moment. So this is what we sort of think the global economy will achieve this year, about 2.7% growth. That's down from 3.9% our forecast before Putin's invasion of Ukraine. You saw that slide earlier on, the cost of all of that to the global economy. And we're feeling that now, but we'll certainly be feeling that in 2023 as well. So let me just come on there. And you see this dramatic increase of all of those colder economies where economic activity is cooling off. So even though this year hasn't been great in terms of GDP growth, and we should have expected a stronger, more sustained, synchronized economy around the world as we came out of COVID, because of the issues I've been talking about, the invasion of Ukraine, interest rates, cost of living, energy prices, and all the rest of it, that's really going to weigh on growth throughout 2023. So apologies for bringing such a dire picture to you. But I think, knowing, having a proper sort of realistic understanding of the economic context is really important. It does get better after this, of course, and we always go through these ups and downs in global economies, and certain economies will do better than others. But this is a fundamental sort of a flaw, I think, for us to be aware of. Okay, so I won't go into too much detail there. Let me just move on. More positively, and this is always the case, Asia will be growing over the global rate, GDP growth rate. We've got a lot of younger, more nimble economies within the region. All of those, well, you can see over here, if I look at this red line, which is our forecast for 2023 for the global economy, most of Asia's economy are going to be growing well above that trend rate, which is very good to see. And we know why that is. We know that these are dynamic economies. We know that there are many economies with young growing populations, that emerging middle class, the rapid pace of urbanization, the demand for products and services. That's driving this growth here. So, well done on being in the right part of the world. Spare a thought for your colleagues in Europe and North America into next year. I think the other thing to keep in mind as well is that there has been a lot of pressure on Asian economies throughout this year. And that goes back to the Fed in America increasing its interest rates. So if you just took $1 million and stuck it in a bank account in America, you'd be getting 3-4% return on all of that, which means that people don't want to have what they would term more risky economies, let's say the ringgit or the Philippine peso, or take a case in point, Japan. The yen is at about a 30-something year low against the US States dollar. Great time to go to Japan if you earn in dollars or anything that's not yen, actually, and Japan is now opening up. But it's a real example of how strong the US dollar is. That puts pressure on economies like Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, and so on. They need to defend their currency against that. But we're nowhere near the type of challenges that we had in the global or the Asian financial crisis. The infrastructure is much better. So we don't have any concerns about any kind of financial risk in Asia at the moment. That could always change. We need to keep an eye on what the Fed is doing. We need to keep an eye on what central banks are doing here within the region. But at the moment, we think that downward pressure on Asian economies will start to alleviate as the Fed reaches its plateau, and then maybe as we get into the middle of next year, starts to cut interest rates again. But remember, the main battle for people like the Fed is fighting inflation, and their main tool to do that is higher interest rates. So within, over the next few weeks, just keep an eye on what the Fed is doing, and that will give you an indication of what that means here for the region. Okay, and I think a final one on Asia, and this is an interesting one. I have a background in foreign direct investment, which I find a fascinating area, and one of the key sort of mechanisms for growth within the region. Where you look at these dark blue bars here, this is foreign direct investment flows going into China. And you can see that sort of story that China's been a major destination for foreign direct investment, American firms, Thai firms, British firms, whatever it is, setting up operations in China over the years. And ASEAN has sort of been standing in its shadow. But if you go back, well, from here, I guess, 2020 onwards, we do see a steady increase in FDI, and our projections are that in the next few years, that ASEAN will be attracting around about the same amount of FDI as China is at the moment. That's the attractiveness of Asia, but it's also the challenges that foreign firms have within the Chinese economy. And it'd be very interesting to see what happens now that we've had the 5-year Party Congress out of the way, and what that means for foreign investors there as well. So I think a very positive well, as positive as it can be, a story for ASEAN economies. They're going to be growing above the global trend rate. Foreign direct investment is going to be increasing. The pressure on currencies is going to start to come off. So, don't get misled by all the doom and gloom about the big headline figures. Look underneath it and see where the drivers of growth are. Okay, just a quick one on risk then, because we publish our economic outlooks, we publish our forecasts and all the analysis around that. We also publish risks to that forecast. So what are some of the issues, events that could have a negative or positive impact on our forecast? So I'm just going to show you the top 10 that we have at the moment for the global economy. Sorry, let me just go back. And let me just talk through the thinking here. You see these colors here? The way that we sort of get to a score is we look at how likely something is to happen, okay? And then we have a look at the impact. If that event happened, what would be the impact on it? And we sort of give scores to these. So, probability, very low that this is going to happen, up to a 5, very likely that this is going to happen. And then the impact, if that happens, very low or very high. And so where you get things like a high and a very high up here, that's going to give us a very high score. And that means that it's very likely to happen. And it's going to have a big impact on our forecast. So it's going to have a big impact on those economies. So right at the top at the moment is a cold winter, making Europe's energy crisis all the more difficult to weather. This is our biggest concern. And just think through, what that means. If people have less money in their pocket because they've got soaring energy costs that they have to pay, if the government is going to be subsidizing energy, then there's less investment going into other sectors of the economy. So, that's going to have a negative impact on demand and therefore on the economic impact. Some other sort of more relevant ones for us here in Asia. So conflict between China and Japan, and of course bringing in the United States. The tensions are always there. They go up and down. We had Speaker Pelosi in the region a few weeks ago, which led to a real sort of heightening of tensions there. There's a lot of speculation about what Xi Jinping will be doing following the party congress vis-a-vis Taiwan and so on. I don't think we have it up here, but no, we don't. But North Korea generally gets onto this chart regularly. Just today, missiles being lobbed back and forth over the maritime demarcation line and so on. There's always these sort of risk of security issues exploding within the region. And then coming down to something like this, China's zero COVID policy leads to a severe recession. That all of those issues I'm talking about, so, the property bust, the sort of liquidity gaps in China, plus the choking off of economic activity, actually tips China into a recession. We're not forecasting that, but that is a risk that we keep in mind. Actually, a lot of this data, you can go online. If you go to eiu.com, you can find this yourself and have a look through some of that analysis. I think the key thing then is to start thinking about, well, what does it mean? What does all of this context mean for me, for my business, and so on? So I just wanted to come on and think about that for a moment. Okay, we've just got a couple of minutes to wrap up. But I think these are a few points that we should all be keeping in mind in that context of what's going on within the global economy. I already sort of mentioned the whole sort of issue around supply chains. This is one of the key topics that we engage with a business audience about. It's the China +1 policy, it's the geopolitical risk, it's the perceived need to shorten supply chains, reshoring, friendshoring, building resilience and agility into supply chains. These are really sort of top of agenda issues for the people that we're talking to at the moment. And so what's the opportunity there? Looking at your supply chain, looking at where you can take risk out, where you can implement some ESG priorities, for example, around decarbonizing your supply chain. This is the time to do it. This is when people are really actively looking at those options. I won't go through all of these in detail, but maybe just to focus on this green transition as well. We see this as a real driver of growth and a very positive driver of growth as well. If you were to go back a few years ago, everybody was talking about accelerating your digital transformation and so on, and the drivers for all of that being customer-centric processes, of being competitive and agile and all the rest of it. Now, it seems that digital transformation is, the purpose of digital transformation is very much to accelerate that drive towards net zero, for example. So, a lot of that purpose coming through in investment decisions that are being made. Okay. Let me just then wrap up, and very happy to take any questions if we've got time here. If not, I'll be around this afternoon as well. To shift the focus of attention onto you as business leaders. And I don't know if you've come across this sort of approach to thinking about leadership, but I find it very intuitive. It's something that INSEAD is a model that INSEAD uses in their executive education training and so on. It's something that we think about when we're trying to look at those longer term trends that are shaping the global economy, but bringing them back to, well, what does it mean for the business? What does it mean for the business leader and the individual here? And really, thinking about the sort of altitude that you're flying, that 50,000 feet right at the top of the commercial airline sort of flight envelope there, and looking at that big picture, looking over the horizon, thinking about the strategy, thinking about those waves of disruption that are coming towards you. And then as you sort of fly down, okay, so what does that mean for the organization? How are we going to deal with that? How can we have a tactical response to disruption, or some of the things that I've been talking about there? Focusing on planning, implementation, and execution of that. And then finally, much more personally, thinking about your own role within all of that, the self-awareness that you have of these issues, or not, and how can you get yourself better informed? How can you plug into those new sources of information and learning that are going to help you to navigate through all of this turbulence that we're seeing in the global economy? So just sort of to put a bit of color on all of this. If you're thinking about that changing nature of the global economy, we've had waves of disruption leading to business transformation. The COVID episode, which, as I said, has still not left us completely here within Asia, was very, very damaging. It also unleashed a huge amount of innovation and reimagining of business models as well. That's a great example of how you can take that adversity and a new set of priorities around which you can build a strategy. We also talk a lot, we do a lot of work in this area around purpose. What is the purpose of the firm? And how does that link into sustainability, or helping governments, whatever, with their sustainability development goal commitments as well? We've done quite a bit of work with UN agencies looking at digital education readiness in countries in South and Southeast Asia as well. And this, I think, is another real example of a very positive trend, that continued investment in technology, because policymakers know that a digital future is the only future that they can that's within grasp, but they need to be investing in that, and they need to put in place the right policies to achieve it as well. So at the tactical level, okay, we know all of this disruption, we think about purpose and so on. How can we accelerate that digital transformation? How can we communicate that purpose internally to all of our colleagues and externally to the market, to our suppliers, to our clients, and so on? And then finally, be curious, learning from peers, network outside of your established networks. Again, I started off by saying it's a great pleasure always to come to these type of meetings, because I can learn from you. Do the same. We have this sort of saying within the Economist group that we're targeting that globally curious band of people who are interested in learning more. They want to know what's going on in different parts of the world, in different sectors around technology, geopolitics, and so on. So I think I'll just leave you with that. Hopefully that's given you a quick sort of shot of insight from the Economist group about how we see the global economy, some of our core forecasts. And just to reiterate, this year hasn't been great. Next year won't be particularly good either, but things will start to pick up and rebound after that. Do keep your eye on things like interest rates and what's happening in the Fed. That has major implications here within the region. But let's not forget those underlying drivers of growth that we see particularly in Southeast Asia. Please do send me any questions if you've got them. If you've got any time now, I'm very happy to take them. But if not, as I say, I'll be around for a while. Richard, back to you.
Does anybody have any questions for Andrew? Okay, if not, Andrew, thank you very much. Most of you here, if not all of you here, are business leaders, and I'm sure that situation that Andrew has been sharing with us has been troubling most of us in the last couple of years. And that's one of the key reasons we brought Andrew to share his thoughts and experience with us, so that we're able to have better clarity of mind in having the information that he shared with us to inform the decisions that we make for our own businesses. So thank you very much, Andrew, for doing that for us. Now that we've had the benefit of the big picture and a clearer one, I'll now turn our focus to what our business is about, the AV market. The 2022 Industry and Outlook Trends Analysis, IOTA report produced by AVIXA, the Global Association for the AV Industry, highlights that while general economic expansion has slowed due to COVID-19, the Pro-AV sector is growing fast, with projected annual growth rate of some 5.9% from this year to 2027. At the same time, headwinds exist in the form of supply chain issues and the threat of a recession. While net growth is expected, how much and in what sectors remain questions in the minds of those in the industry. And there's no better person to help us paint a clearer picture than Dave Lebaskas, the CEO of AVIXA. Please help me extend a warm welcome to Dave.
Thank you, Richard. After Dr. Staples' presentation, I'm thinking maybe we should just head to the networking reception and have a drink. What do you? Thank you. There we go. Thank you very much. Thank you again. As Richard introduced me, and I've met many of you, my name is Dave Lebaskas. I have the privilege of being the CEO of the Audiovisual and Integrated Experience Association. In addition to convening the industry with events like INFOCOMM Southeast Asia, we also invest strongly in educating the industry, providing professional training, certification, standards, and really over the last number of years have matured and invested fairly significantly in our work with regards to market intelligence. And I'm here today to share some of that with you. This slide, absolutely not nearly as cool as Dr. Staples' slide with the hexagrams, essentially is saying, I think, the same thing to you that he said, which was things were looking to be fairly slow. They have gotten worse over the last 6 months to a year. But in the longer term trend, we see continued growth across the GDP. So essentially, if we can get through the next year to 2 years as an overall global economy, the engines for growth continue. As Richard sort of forecast for you, I want to spend some time and really spend most of my time sharing with you our outlook with regards to the professional AV industry. So let me dive in. This is also very familiar to you. We see essentially these 3 key areas as impacting the Pro AV market. We've got inflation that's impacting every market around the world. We, particularly in a technology-based industry, have been significantly impacted by supply chain issues rippling around the world and staff shortages. Even today, in a conversation here, being repeated anywhere I've traveled throughout the globe for the last year, has been discussion about the challenges with regards to finding qualified, talented staff and using them to grow your business. I'll relay with you, I was speaking to one large integrator in the US who actually was very thankful. He was sharing with me, as long as, and for those of you that are manufacturers in the room, he said, for as long as there is a supply chain to blame everything on, none of my clients will blame me on the fact that I can't actually install anything because I don't have any talented labor to actually install it. He's like, as soon as the supply chain issues are resolved, it's all going to be my fault, and I'm going to have to find people to be able to install this. So this is something that we all are facing. It's certainly an area that AVIXA focuses in on an ongoing basis as part of our DNA of working to attract people to the workforce, sharing what is a career in professional AV. How do you actually have a successful career in that area? As we continue to look for the changes that are taking place, we see continued risk for recession growing as well. When we entered this year, the typical forecast was less than 50% likelihood from most of the economists that we were capturing information from. That's now shifted. And recession, not necessarily globally, but clearly going to be a higher risk for that in Europe, thanks to the invasion of the Ukraine. Inflation does absolutely contribute to that. It is likely, as we see it, to be less severe than 2008's was, but the industry that we are in is an ubiquitous industry that serves so many verticals that I wouldn't say that we are inflation-proof at this point, but we do anticipate that even in a recession, AV continues to grow. Some of the technologies, the experiences, the solutions that we provide to the marketplace are at the forefront of that digital transformation. There is no distance education or remote education without AV. There is no unified communications or collaboration. There is no ability to have Teams calls and Zoom calls and work from remote locations without AV. And we clearly see that continued demand increasing. We are one of the solutions to many of those problems that are taking place. So if you had been reconsidering your career based on the context that you've had shared with you thus far, stay in this industry. This is a very strong industry within which to continue to build your career. There's a little bit of my recruiting coming out there. When we do, one of the reports that we do, and this is something that we do on a monthly basis, and this data is actually from our September report, and this is a diffusion index. So with the first index, what we are asking integrators is, do you intend or do you anticipate that your sales will go up or go down in the near future? And we ask them whether or not they will stay relatively the same, increase significantly, or decrease significantly. Whenever that number is higher than 50, that suggests that we are optimistic about our industry. Now, I will share with you that AV professionals are notoriously optimistic. And it is rare that this number has actually dropped below 50. But these numbers that we are seeing here at the 64.4 and 62.2 for the hiring are significantly higher than they have been over the course of the years that we have done this index. That is the supply side of our industry, right? Remember that who I was telling you we were interviewing there were the people that are actually installing the audiovisual technology. This slide is focused in on the demand side of our marketplace. So we also go to those who are buying it, and we ask them, are you planning on spending more money, the same amount of money, or less money in this quarter than you did the same quarter a year ago? And what you can see there, extending across all the quarters back to Q3 of 2021 on this chart, is that the majority of our respondents are anticipating that they are going to spend more this year than they did the same time last year. And the second chart, I'm sorry, the first chart is really, are you going to spend more on capital? The second chart is actually how much of that capital expenditure is going to be on AV. And you can see there with the red again that there is a continued anticipation of spending more money on AV than we did a year ago. And since all of us in this room make money, selling AV, that's great news for us. And it's I think, anecdotally clear to you as well. The change, and I'll get to a slide that actually walks through the different types of solutions that we see AV being applied to, and walk through some of how those trends are changing with regards to investment. So yes, there are tailwinds. There are economic challenges. But part of that money pouring into the economy that Dr. Staples shared with us is government spending on activities that are being used for audiovisual investment. So all of the distance education that's being enabled is audiovisual. Excuse me. Another aspect of this that is supportive of us, not only are we the technology that supports us staying apart from each other and still being able to operate, but there is a return to real life gatherings similar to this one. This meeting itself can't take place without AV. The various different activities that are taking place in stadiums, sports stadiums, the reinvestment of technologies and hospitality experiences to capture and gather people and bring them into the spaces, the growth of digital signage and out-of-home investment that's being made, all of these aspects of people returning from isolation to experiencing the world together are being reinforced and enhanced by investments in audiovisual technology. We see significant growth in digital signage, recognizing that digital signage is more than advertising. Digital signage is wayfinding. Digital signage is experience. Digital signage is creating memorable opportunities. And we see significant growth in applications that weren't really even explored or talked about. I happened to read a headline this morning in the hotel room about the first direct LED broadcast studio in a high school in Australia. And when you think about the implementations of those technologies at the very highest level, shifting to a high school level at this point, it's a significant opportunity for us. We do see all of the regions recovering. This is a chart. We break the world up into 3 regions, the Americas, APAC, and EMEA. This is giving you data that takes the size of the industry. These are in billions of US dollars across 2019 through 2023 across each of the regions. And what you see is continued growth across all of them. You can see the rate of growth is changing depending on which marketplace we're in. The high point for you is that 9% growth between 2022 and 2023 in the APAC region. So continuing to lead the world as far as growth is concerned within our industry. Which is what I just said. APAC is in fact the largest and fastest growing pro AV region. The growth at 6.6% CAGR between 22 and 27. Which is significantly faster than we anticipate the overall economy to be growing. India will be the greatest contributor to that growth as we anticipate. The corporate market continues to be perhaps the largest market for us. But as I had mentioned, you could see that entertainment, the growth of entertainment, the utilization of AV and live experiences is a significant aspect of that. Digital signage I mentioned, and I'll show you some information about that specifically in a few more slides. And the fact that we have continued delivery of more and more creative content creates greater and greater investments in the physical environment. So let's look a little bit more specifically. We break down our data. I was just talking about APAC, and similar to the messaging that Dr. Staples gave, the Asian economies, these younger and more vibrant, more agile economies, we definitely see also contributing to great growth here. India, one of the largest growth areas at 7.7, but Southeast Asia at 7.8. Australia at 5.9, The market, essentially saying it again and again and again, is an incredibly fast-growing market. This is, I think, one of the slides that I'd like to spend a little bit of time on. What I'm doing here on the right is breaking what we do as an industry into a solution area. So we do a couple different sort of slices of our data. AV's a bit complicated, right? It's everything from the Jumbotron in the sports stadium to the loudspeakers in this room. So the way that we look at it is we look at it geographically. We also look at it by vertical. So where is that technology being implemented? Is it in education? Is it in corporate? Is it in hospitality, government, healthcare, et cetera? Another way that we need to slice the data so that it's valuable to certain people is how much of it is in displays, how much of it is in microphones, how much of it is in control systems, how much of it is in services. What I'm showing you here is a slice that we added within the last couple of years, which is how is it being used? So if you let me dive into digital signage, for example, digital signage can be used very differently across almost every vertical that I had just shared with you. But it's still digital signage. And so, but depending on how we slice the data, it gives us an ability to look at how do you as a business owner, how do you as somebody that's making decisions about your strategy, focus where do you make an investment with regards to marketing? Where do you demonstrate thought leadership? How do you share your expertise? Because one of the key areas that has not changed, in fact, has probably been emphasized, is the need to not position ourselves in professional position as selling technology for technology's sake, but rather actually directly aligning ourselves with what are the needs, the challenges of our customers' business, and how can we provide solutions to those. And this is the slide that really drives into that. And if you look at the top one, you see conferencing and collaboration. Now, just draw your attention. The yellow dot is showing you where that segment of the industry is in 2022. And then the red and white dot is showing you where it will be positioned in 2027. So today, conferencing and collaboration has the largest share of solutions within our marketplace. And you see that it does have significant growth through 2027, but look at the line next to it, the next line down. Somewhat behind it today is digital signage, but growing at a much faster rate. By 2027, digital signage is the most impactful solution of the AV industry. So if you're not paying attention to that, if you haven't looked at that and looked at the integration of the digital signage ecosystem, we would strongly recommend that you head and look in that area. Learning will continue to grow, all of them. What the other piece of this slide shares with you is there's not a solution area that is contracting. All of these areas are growing. Some of them from much smaller, and you can see towards the bottom, I'll highlight the live events, which I was talking about, clearly coming off of a very small base over the last several years, but experiencing significant growth. We all know from our time here already in Bangkok that we hunger for time to be together. We hunger for an opportunity to share with each other, and that's going to continue. As you might tell from my American accent, that I'm from the US. We spent a number of years, and I suspect all of you did, learning how to eat restaurant food out of styrofoam and plastic boxes. The experience of being back in the real life, back into having an opportunity to interact with each other is being emphasized and reinforced by the technology solutions that we're implementing today. Then it's further amplified by the digital transformation that's taking place on top of that, with designs at essentially every venue taking into effect the need for an Instagram moment, the need for a visual, the need for an opportunity to be able to share video, graphics that amplify the experience that you've had to all of your friends, all of your connections. So let's talk a little bit more about APAC and the APAC focuses. Clearly, China's economic performance is going to have far-reaching impact for us. Clearly, zero COVID is going to continue to have an impact on this region's economy. The distributors, it's interesting, and I know we're actually going to have some conversation about sort of channel roles in the panel that follows. So I'm not going to say a whole lot here, but what we are seeing is continued shifting in our own supply channel on what the roles are of the various different participants at the various different stages of it. Clearly, that supply channel the distributor in that channel has had significant opportunities created by the supply chain channels in creating access to different solutions, providing and sharing those accesses. The key here that I would leave you with, I'm going to move to my closing thoughts, is you are in the right place. Growth prevails. There are absolutely tailwinds that we face because we are essentially a part of every industry, every vertical that's taking place in the world and everywhere in the world. Those economics are in fact challenging. And then I guess I would reinforce the discussion about agility and keeping your options open. Do not make long-term huge infrastructure investments in the short term. Keep your options open. Keep an eye on what's changing within the economy. Keep an eye on all of these aspects that are completely unpredictable. The risks that were highlighted in the previous presentation. All of those, in fact, create opportunities for us. They also, of course, create risks and challenges for us. But we're in a good place. We've had a great, we have a great industry that is continuing to be more and more relevant across various different applications of it. So thank you very much for your time. And I can take questions too if you have any. All right.
Oh, hi there. I'm from Hong Kong. The reason I'm here basically is because of the challenges that we are facing in this economy. The global chip shortage, the prices increases, the lack of availability of products has shifted our mindset to a large extent. We used to be in the comfort zone where we could use standard policies, standard products, deployment without thinking, using major brands and all sorts. With major brands who are not here today, unfortunately, you can't see them downstairs, not distributing the products with the chip shortages from maybe, as you said, it could be China, it could be Taiwan, it could be other countries where they are not producing at full capacity and not allowing full distribution or using the full potential of the distribution. Now, how do you think this will change in the upcoming periods, and what should we as AVIXA members do in the next year or 2 years?
Go to the networking event? Well, actually, I think you're asking a very serious question, and I've actually listened to this conversation evolve over the last year to year and a half, and I happen to have an interesting position within which to hear that conversation, in that oftentimes significant contributors and participants within industry are having conversations with me that they wouldn't necessarily have in public. And I've watched our industry move essentially from denial to acceptance to resolution. In that phase somewhere, somebody said, Dave, wave the magic wand and solve the supply channel problems. I think early conversations with those probably further down the channel. So the integrators, the people that were actually not able to finish a project, was far more clearly realistic than the people at the top of the channel. But I think what you're seeing now is a key move by the manufacturers, the solution providers, to be very transparent about what they have, when they're going to have it, and working diligently to provide you with different solutions. The situation will resolve. I think it will resolve in a number of ways. One, that bottleneck will ultimately resolve itself. Two, supplies and demand will align themselves. Sadly, one of the easiest way to solve a supply chain problem is to have a recession and reduce demand. And there will be some impact of that. And I think I started with let's go to the networking, but I think part of solving that problem is being done at the 5-foot level and the 50-foot level, not at the 50,000-foot level. And it's having really clear conversations with your customers and asking them, where is your flexibility? Is your flexibility on the solution provider? Is your flexibility on the timing for completion? Or is your flexibility on price? And this is an age-old cliche of, do you want it fast, good, or right? But essentially, those are the constraints of a project. And based on those constraints, you can design a solution for that customer. It won't be the solution that they went into and assumed and anticipated. I think trust, transparency, conversations across all chains of that, all links of that chain are the short-term solution. The long-term solution is macro. And the other longer-term solution is the mega trends towards moving more and more of what is done into software-based, cloud-based applications that are not dependent on some of those constraints. And I think you're seeing that across all of those major manufacturers, and you're seeing that accelerating. That, of course, you cannot take a loudspeaker and put it in the cloud. You can't take your input and your output devices and put them in the cloud, but arguably almost everything else in between can in fact move towards some sort of software solution, and you're seeing huge shifts being made in that. I hope that is enough of an answer for you. I think what your question at the end was, what is my advice to AVIXA members? It's to strengthen the ties with the other AVIXA members that you know, meet new ones, find alternative solutions, and then in open, transparent, collaborative conversations, work through what is the solution you can deliver to your customer today as part of that team, and how do you migrate them to the solution they ultimately want a year from now or 5 years from now.